Hi everyone, welcome. This is a new series I'm calling Do the Wrong, Right Thing. And the impetus for this title is a riff off the Spike Lee movie Do the Right Thing. But I couldn't only use the word right because that would simply imply that there's only one way to do things, and that is not correct. So that's why it's called Do the Wrong, Right Thing. The inspiration for these series, the whole thing though, is a discussion I had with my teacher in France, Martin Aylward, who said there is no such thing as wrong. And when I spoke with him recently, I asked for greater clarification, and he qualified it by saying there is no wrong experience, which is actually a big change. But I believe what he means is that on a personal level, let's say however you feel, it's okay. It just is. In fact, his favorite phrase is just like this. And I get that. We have to accept how we feel in the present moment. Otherwise, as Eckhart Tolle says, what you resist persists. So that acceptance is an essential foundation of awareness, along with the cultivation of curiosity, compassion, and, as I always add, creativity. The clarity that comes with awareness shows us, without judgment, whether something is wrong or right. And we use our creativity to either change it or embrace it. And so I totally agree with Martin about acceptance, but don't agree with discounting that things can either be wrong or right. We tend to know when we're happy, we know why, and it's usually for a very specific reason. But that's not necessarily the case with fear and anger or grief. So it's crucial we not just accept how we feel, but also explore how and why we feel the way we do and understand maybe it doesn't have to be that way. There doesn't need to be so much suffering in order to fully be alive. And if you just accept, just say this is the way it is, and not take the next step, not identify what's working and what's not, what's wrong and what's right, then you may never find a sense of ease, of well-being, of non-struggle. And yes, the world is not designed to make us happy, but we don't have to accept being unhappy. We do have a choice, and it begins with understanding it, with all of its nuances. So in this series, we'll be discussing the wrong, right side of speaking and listening, which is tonight, seeing and avoiding, thinking and feeling, acting and pausing, and giving and taking, all of which will hopefully lead to wisdom. But again, the thing to keep in mind is there is no one way. And as I mentioned, tonight we're going to be exploring speaking and listening because they do go hand in hand. So when it comes to speech, is there such a thing as right or wrong speech? Well, actually, in the Buddhist tradition, there's a very long emphasis, a very pronounced emphasis on right speech or wise speech, as it is a critical element of the Eightfold Path, which is the path to becoming a Bodhisattva. And I've just spent the last 6 months studying with the teacher, Oren Jay Sofer, focusing on this concept of wise speech through the teachings of Marshall Rosenberg, who founded a teaching called nonviolent communication. And they give very detailed instructions on right speech, which we're going to go over some of tonight. So obviously, there's a strong imperative for a right way of speaking. And if there's a right way, there must be a wrong way. In her book, The First Word, author Christine Keneally says, "The mystery lies in the nature of the spoken word. For all its power to wound and seduce, speech is our most ephemeral creation. It is little more than air. It exits the body as a series of puffs and dissipates quickly into the atmosphere. There are no verbs preserved in amber, no ossified nouns, and no prehistorical shrieks forever spread-eagled in lava that took them by surprise." So fascinating to remember, the spoken word is gone in an instant. But it's also fascinating to think that there is actually no verifiable proof of how or when we invented language. Yet words reflect our culture, our traditions, our history, told over generations, and all of that is carried forward with words. So words are extremely powerful, but by themselves, they are neither good nor bad, right nor wrong. And yet, almost everything that happens in this world is because of words. Love letters, divorce agreements, declarations of war, peace treaties, political manifestos, great literature, suicide notes, and religious texts, just to name a few. So even though there's no historical data on when we began using words, our words themselves do leave a history, a very long history, which is so unique and essential to our species. Speech, or verbal communication, serves as a foundation for connection, and in humans is the basis of all interpersonal relationships, whether familial, romantic, friendly, professional, or adversarial. Communication accounts for 90% of things going well or badly. As a project manager, I used to say a successful project requires 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and control. And the latter 2 won't work at all without the former. So communication is absolutely essential. And it's all about connection, a shared understanding. And the basis of wise speech, that shared connection, comes from the same awareness we bring to ourselves. They are intrinsically linked. It's very hard to relate to someone else in real terms if we are not on real terms with ourselves. In nonviolent communication, which is really mislabeled, it needs to be revised to wise communication. Communication can literally be encapsulated in 2 words: feelings and needs. In fact, Marshall Rosenberg says human beings are only saying 2 things: please and thank you. The rest is simply expressing how we get our needs met. And he has created a simple formula for that exact purpose. 4 simple steps that will lead to a positive interaction with others. And they are observation, feeling, need, and request. Unfortunately, OFNR does not really make a good acronym, so you kind of just have to remember it. But let me go in a little bit, dive in on this. Observation is really observe truthfully what is going on, just the facts, not only on an intrapersonal level, but also on a wider context, taking in history, social context, race, and gender, taking all of those into account, because you may need a different response depending on those factors. Feelings. How do I really feel? Sad, angry, lonely, afraid? Feelings are different than needs. They tell us if our needs are being met or not. One way to tell if you're talking about your feelings is, do you feel it in your body? Is there a felt sense somewhere in your body? If you say, I feel betrayed, attacked, misunderstood, or ignored, that's blame, and that's not feelings. Yet if you say, I feel sad, I feel happy, that is a feeling. And it brings the power back to you because you're not a victim. Needs. What really matters to you? Everything we say is to meet a need. Do we need to be heard, to be loved, to be respected? I know I need to be heard, loved, and respected. So I would say that many of my verbal emissions are about getting to be recognized for those needs. And finally, make a request. So how do we move forward? It's not about telling the other person what to do, but offering a collaborative approach with creative suggestions of how to move forward. And there's a wonderful workshop with Marshall Rosenberg that was recorded many years ago, but is still absolutely fascinating. And I'll put it in our references when I email out the links. But he says, really, what you want to know is these 4 truths. Learn how to identify and express what you're feeling. Don't blame the other person. Listen empathically to where the other person is coming from so you can build a shared connection. And then make a clear request. So that is right speech. Wrong speech is accusatory and would be something like, you made me feel sad. It's then about making yourself out to be a victim instead of building empathy or a shared connection. Because really, most people, as I said, just want to be heard, to be respected, to be acknowledged, to be loved. It's really that simple. Whether the context is familial, romantic, friendly, professional, or adversarial. These are basic human needs. If you feel loved, you'll feel not alone. You'll feel supported. You'll feel less afraid. Of course, it's not possible to love everyone, but it's still possible to connect on the simple level of shared humanity. Within my family, there are those close to me that I might not love in the full spectrum of the word, but I can still relate to them as human beings, as females, as living on this planet together with our shared needs, and connect with her on those levels. So we can't obviously just talk about talking without talking about listening. They go hand in hand like blue and yellow. And sometimes right speech is no speech at all, just listening. Have you ever known anyone or worked with anyone that was only interested in their own opinion? Well, recently I was working with a group of 6 meditation teachers to come up with a class. And there was a woman who was very knowledgeable about mindfulness, but not so much about communication. She would constantly cut people off without letting them finish a sentence. She was always the first and the loudest to speak, mainly complaining about things in her life. And if I'd been planning on working with her over a long period, I would have tried the nonviolent communication methods on her, but luckily we completed the class and I could go my separate way. But I would gladly have tried and told her the most important gift she can offer another person is her attention. And listening requires just one thing. It's a bit alien to our culture, silence. So real dialogue, real wise speech often requires the opposite of speaking. It requires listening. Listening will build trust and goodwill, and most important, shows empathy and compassion. Cultivating the ability to listen just might allow you to be transformed by what you hear, to see outside of your point of view, which requires a wholehearted presence and humility, and that is where our mindfulness practice comes in. In listening, it is possible to understand someone else's truth and have them understand yours. Building that bridge with humility and compassion, but not subjugating your own needs, is the key to wise speech. Because as we know, there's only one goal of speech, and that is to connect. And that implies understanding and respect for each other, so needed at this time in this country. And most likely you'll know if you used wise speech or not, because the other person will respond with the same compassion and kindness you shared in order to make that connection. So I wanted to share a quote. As I mentioned, I had been on a retreat last week at Spirit Rock, virtual retreat. And one of the leaders is named Wes Nisker. And he gave this wonderful talk on speaking and listening. So it was very appropriate. He goes, for a big shot of awe, come to your sense of hearing and remember or realize that the outside world is completely silent. Life has evolved this Rube Goldberg sound system, so you can read the environment at a distance by hearing it inside your head. For instance, as I speak, I am making air move by flapping my lips. Air movements vibrate your eardrums, and rattle 3 little bones that press against some fluid that hits a membrane that moves tiny little hairs that trigger nerve cells that send electrical signals to the brain that produce what we call sounds. The outside world is completely silent. It all happens inside our head. So if we are to understand wise speech, understand it's as much about speaking as about listening. And the beauty of wise speech is that even if you say the wrong thing, you can make it right by the next thing that you say. As Miles Davis so famously said, and I quote quite often, it's not the note you play that's the wrong note. It's the note you play afterward that makes it right or wrong. So thank you. And in the next class, we are going to do seeing and looking. So thank you very much, and let's sit for a bit. Close our eyes and come into our meditation posture.